Hey everyone, Yoiston here, and today I'm joined by my great friend Royan on our first Men of the West Patreon exclusive podcast called the Westernesse Podcast. Royan, feel free to introduce yourself.
Hello everyone, my name is Royan, good friend of Yoiston in his podcast making and other videos and history, you know.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we've been Lord of the Rings online buddies for 6 years? Something like that.
It's been a while.
Oh, yeah. Well, so today we're going to start with our first podcast here, and ultimately I want this video series to kind of be different than the ones on my normal YouTube channel. Ultimately, it's going to be a little more raw, a little more conversational. So all of you out there, I hope you aren't expecting too many fast cuts or any of that. I just kind of want this to be a little bit more laid back and relaxed, and in that way we can make this a much longer video than my normal ones. So, well, we'll start with our introductions to Tolkien. Ultimately, I got introduced to Tolkien's works from my dad, who showed me Peter Jackson's movies when I was a kid. And from there, I started to play the video games and do all that. What about you, Ryan?
I was also introduced by my dad, but not in like the normal. I mean, pretty much. Not the old way that people used to be like, oh, you should read this book. Yeah. It was very much my dad was watching a movie when I was really little, and I saw it and I was like, oh, well, I want to watch this movie because my dad is like 1 year older. And then he actually came to me when I was older. He's like, all right, it's time to watch these. And after watching The Fellowship of the Ring extended, which took like all day.
Oh yeah.
He then gave me The Hobbit to read, and then that's kind of where it really kicked off.
So wait, how old were you? Do you remember?
When I first read The Hobbit?
Yeah, around that time.
I had to have been like 11.
Oh yeah, okay. I think I was around there too, 12, something like that.
Yeah.
Cool. What was the first Middle Earth video game that you played? I think mine was Battle for Middle Earth 1, I think.
The first game I played was Battle for Middle Earth 2. The first game I watched someone play was Battle for Middle Earth 1. Back when you're a little kid and you go to your friend's house and you see their older siblings playing games and you just watch them because it's fun.
Yeah, exactly. Well, cool. All right. So, we can move on to ultimately our favorite parts of the Legendarium and all of that kind of stuff. So I'll start with what's my favorite character? I get this question quite often in some of my comment sections, all that. I would have to say Aragorn. I mean, obviously with the Men of the West and my fascination with Arnor especially, but Gondor and Numenor. But it ultimately all stems from Aragorn. But he is followed closely by Samwise Gamgee. And I'm going to do an epic character history on him later this week. So,
Can't wait.
What about you, Ryan? Oh, thank you.
I mean, when you're talking about the Legendarium, you kind of have to go in saying Aragorn is specifically written, and his story makes him, in my opinion, the favorite character.
Yeah,
he's the most relatable to everyone, and it's a really interesting way that he's written. That he's like the good guy who can really do no wrong, but you're still rooting for him the whole way. But so I don't really I don't take that into account, and I try to go deeper in. And I'm always a huge fan of the elves. And it used to be Legolas when I was a kid watching the movies, but then when I started to dive into the lore, it definitely became Glorfindel.
Oh yeah. Oh god, he's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, what about Silmarillion? Do you have a favorite character there? I mean, I feel like everyone's favorite's got to be Fingolfin, but he's just a beast.
He's the kid, dude.
Yeah, dude.
I mean, he's like a character that you hear his story, and unlike the Silmarillion, I feel like there's a lot of characters that you hear of their deeds, but you don't hear of the way they feel.
That's true. Yeah.
And I think Fingolfin is one of the exceptions where you can really understand his character arc.
Oh yeah. Yeah, he's like that good brother that everyone wants to be and wants to have, right? The one that no matter how many times you get in a fight with them, they'll always be there, that kind of thing.
Yeah, but my favorite character from the Silmarillion is Feanor, and not because I agree with any of his motives, but I do think he's the most interesting character. I think his arc is just wild to try to understand.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I mean, this is something that I hear sometimes about Tolkien's works is that Tolkien liked to draw upon like one-dimensional, two-dimensional characters, right? These guys that are just written in one specific way. But then Feanor is always like one of the first to come to mind when I always hear that argument from other people. It's like, have you guys even looked at the Silmarillion? Have you looked at Feanor's gray sense of morality?
His fall from grace.
Oh yeah, yeah. The last time I put up a poll for the my next theory, I was thinking about doing a what if Melkor didn't escape from captivity before the First Age began, and ultimately I feel like if he didn't, Feanor wouldn't have fallen from grace, and we would have had a much different outcome, right? Like
we would not have the Silmarillion we have today. That's for sure. I mean, even moving past like. I think the character difference from Sauron in Silmarillion to Sauron in The Lord of the Rings is vast. He's definitely the lackey grunt that you make fun of, that you can like make fun of in Silmarillion.
So he's like constantly running away. He's like, oh, I can't fight these Valar. I'm gonna run. But yeah, in the Third Age, he seems much more able to hold his own, right? And it's like with a lot of parts of Tolkien's works, like we were talking about the other day, it's kind of like how the weapons, how they got worse over time. Certain evils got more evil over time. Like a Balrog in the First Age, they were bad, but they weren't Durin's Bane in the Third Age, which just sent the dwarves into a downward spiral,
Yeah.
So it's like all the evil got better over time and all the good got worse. And so it's kind of Lord of the Rings is that rising, the rising tale.
I mean, if you're gonna look at that, you gotta go in with the mindset that if you're talking about characters that evil villains that last all these thousands of years, they're obviously going to be the best of their kind. Durin's Bane is, I mean, I don't know a whole lot about Balrog culture, but I'm assuming he's a big baddie, and even amongst their kind.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we were talking about. We were talking about magic and how magic in the First Stage definitely seemed to be like the way people lived and how they fought. And then in the Third Age, when the events of the War of the Ring, it really is not, it's not a forerunner.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something that's interesting too. I think I went into this in one of my videos last year, but the Silmarillion, it has all those like runes on the front side of the cover. And and those really say that it's written, or at least not written, but like gathered by Bilbo Baggins. So it's like that frame narrative that our teacher last year told us about, where it was like where it's like the character within the story kind of wrote the whole book, and that's kind of what we get with the Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion. So I do wonder if these metaphysical things that the elves could do in the First Age that they couldn't do as much in the Third Age, like Eärendil riding a ship into the sky to fight a dragon, like things like that. I wonder if that was a little bit exaggerated by Bilbo in writing the Silmarillion, or if that's actually how it was. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, exaggeration could definitely be a part because of the frame narrative. You're kind of a tertiary experience. There's the primary, there's the secondary documents that are the books, and then you're reading that. But well, another thing that I like to think about is take me as a millennial kid in society today, and you give me something that was invented in like the 19 whatevers. So I always like to think about records and how they work with with like a gramophone. If you sat me in a room with everything that I would need, I still would not be able to recreate a device that could read a record.
That's fair.
So I wonder if it's like kind of the same thing in Middle Earth. It's like, oh, well, especially for your elves, you're living for a really long time. It's like, oh, my great grandfather used to do all this crap, but I still don't know how to do it.
That's true. Yeah. Oh, that's fair. And then like just over time, those traditions were forgotten,
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's a very sad part of Tolkien's works. It's that nostalgia, that longing for the elder days, you know. But yeah, it's very interesting. So yeah, so those were our favorite characters. We kind of we kind of branched off. But what's your favorite story, or I guess like narrative that's told within Tolkien's works? I mean, I would have to say there are definitely a lot of good ones, but I mean, and obviously this is the one that most people would say, but just the War of the Ring, right? Like the War of the Ring has just so many elements to it. It has this joy, it has, you know, the sadness, you know, and it's especially more in the books than anything else. I mean, the movies can get parts of it down, but I mean, there were moments where I just broke into tears when I was, you know, going through the Lord of the Rings the last time I went through it. And when Smeagol reached out his hand before Shelob's lair to kind of touch Frodo, and that was almost him coming back out of Gollum, almost him being saved, but then Sam woke up and shooed him away. Right? That's like so sad. It's things like that really get you into the story. And for me, that's what makes the War of the Ring. It's not just the giant battles, the Ride of the Rohirrim. I mean, they definitely add to it, but it's those small character moments as well that it gets to you, you know? You have those feels.
Yeah, I feel like, especially since you kind of touched on the movies, like there's a drastic difference between understanding, even like just for example, Gollum's story arc from watching the movies versus like reading about it or understanding the imagery and other things that Tolkien put it in there. Like when I watch the movies, still to this day, like I don't really feel remorse or about Gollum. He's definitely like an antagonist. And when you read about it, though, you can definitely see how he's like a troubled. He's really just been broken by this ring, and it's really sad. But if I'm going for, I mean, the War of the Ring is the most developed story in the Legendarium. It has the most details to it.
Oh yeah,
I would argue, and so I think that obviously is like, if you're looking at an overarching story, that's going to be one of the best ones like ever in all of fantasy writing, let alone just Tolkien's Legendarium. But I like to dive deeper into that, and I really enjoy the story of the Rohirrim, specifically, like I guess I don't know what the terminology is of the royalty, where you have the royalty at Edoras, and what happens to a society when your king is like completely, he loses his mind. What do you do? Because he's the king. He's been so important to your people. He's been so good.
That's true.
You turn your back on him. You don't know what's wrong. You have like, you could guess about it, but what do you do? And how everyone, like Éowyn, as well as like every other character, how they work off of that, and the revival at the hands of Gandalf, as well as then the coming to Gondor's aid, I think is just a fantastic storyline for that people.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, and again, it's just all of those elements within the War of the Ring. You have those socio-political ones from Rohan and Gondor. You have the character moments from the Fellowship members. This rise to kingship from Aragorn. This greater fall into madness from Gollum. There's just so much. There's so much to it, right? Yeah, it's very, very good. I mean, it really reinvented the genre, at least the modern day genre of fantasy, or at least as some authors would deem like high fantasy. Mm-hmm. Not George R. R. Martin's Song of Ice and Fire.
I would argue that there's definitely a lot of parts. I mean, just because it came so early in fantasy writing, it kind of echoes throughout all these fantasy genres.
Exactly. Right. And I mean, I love the Silmarillion, but I don't know if the Silmarillion is something that could have done, had that same effect, because there are just so many characters and narratives going on at the same time that it's almost this very impressionist piece to read, right? It's this world building. I mean, that's really, he's literally creating the world with it. And sometimes that gets difficult for people that aren't as invested in the lore to read, you know?
I mean, just look at look at your timeline, right?
Yeah.
You've got the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which is three massive books that combine to make one story. Whereas you have the Silmarillion, which is one immensely massive book, but it has so much more ground to cover that you can't get into that depth.
Oh, exactly. And I think I got this question the other day on my Facebook page was if Tolkien hadn't passed away when he did, and if he had like 2 more decades, what works do you think, he would have finished, or do you think he would have finished a lot more of his works? And I think so. I mean, you look at the Book of Lost Tales and the Unfinished Tales. I mean, there are some good narratives and good character arcs going on there that kind of end, and I mean, it's sad to see that. Just like these behind the scenes things going on,
I mean, there is a new book coming out this year in like what, 3 months now?
Yeah.
The Fall of Gondolin. There is just so much stuff that was in his head. Forget 2 decades. If I could have him for a weekend and I have to be like, all right, we need your brain, and we need you to put some organization together here. Throw some ideas down on paper and we'll get something down. And I'm like, he has so much notes and all these things where it's like, imagine if hats off to Christopher Tolkien for doing an amazing job taking his father's like ideas and his dreams and making them a reality even long after his death. But like, imagine if you had J.R.R. Tolkien, the guy who thought it up, the guy who has it all going around in his head. Imagine if he was doing that.
That's true.
And it could go 2 ways. You could either expand the world or go more in depth into what you have. And I think there's a compelling argument for both, and I would love to see either.
Yeah, definitely. To the viewers, let us know in the comments below. What do you think? Like, what stories do you think he would have finished? Or kind of left an enigma, right? I don't think he would have touched the Fourth Age that much. I feel like because he did start with the New Shadow, right? And he didn't. I think he was 12 pages in. He just said, "Nah, it's not going to live up to the Lord of the Rings." And I mean, it would have been really difficult. I think he could have done it. I think he could have made it this grand adventure. But I'm also happy with how he left it. Because ultimately, it would have been a tale focused on men primarily, the men of Gondor and Rohan, and the rebuilding of Arnor, but not really hobbits as much, not as much dwarves or elves or the Valar or any of that. It would have kind of lost its Middle-earth feel,
Oh, yeah. I mean, I feel like with the end of the Third Age and the end of the Lord of the Rings, I mean, he throws some appendixes into it. Yeah. But he leaves it for each in their own. Like, what do you think happened? And pretty much everyone is going to assume that Aragorn is a fantastic king. Yeah. And he leaves eventually because, they all die. But yeah. I like that. I definitely, I like going back in time because it's very much established that it's like, this is the Third Age. You're like, well, what happened in the first 2? Yeah.
Oh, exactly. And then you got the years of the trees and the years of the lamps and
oh my God,
I know. And then the Ainu Lindale, which is like the the music of the Ainur.
It's a whole thing.
Yeah. Well, and that's something too. There might be even more ages than that because in the Silmarillion, and I can't find anything that's more specific than this. When Melkor was in captivity, like we mentioned earlier, by the Valar, it said he was a captive for 3 ages. I don't know what that means because was it like 3 ages as in first, second, and third age, like that time span? But before the
is
first
he
age?
Still captive?
Is he still? But yeah, like because those 3 ages combined were thousands of years. Did he mean that like 3 ages as in that many thousands of years and that many those events happened within that time. You know, like that's crazy, and that's a crazy amount of time. But we really don't get much in that time.
So what's an age to a Valar? Is
Exactly.
that like is that a dozy afternoon, or is that like thousands of years?
That's true. Oh man, yeah. That's crazy. But yeah, I mean, so we're agreed then, like the War of the Ring, right? But
Oh, for sure.
Putting that aside, what would you say in the Silmarillion? What would your more favorite story be?
Well, recently I've been diving a whole lot more into the Feanor story and how I mentioned him earlier, like, you know, he has his fall from grace and then he has all these sons and they just kind of become mini bosses.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And like, I mean, I just think that storyline is, it's a tragedy. It's very much like Shakespearean-esque, like, well, everyone, it sucked for everybody.
Yeah. That's true. It's very Shakespearean. I think for me, there are definitely a lot of good ones in the First Age, but one that stands out for me is during the Years of the Trees, before Melkor was released and everything was good. It was just like the elves, you know, were crossing over to Valinor. You have this very impressionistic view of the whole world, kind of like when you're a kid and you're discovering the world for the first time. What is the ocean? What are mountains and forests and what's life like? It's very reminiscent of that for me, and it just you know, again, I don't know if any other author could really do that. You know, it's incredible. So yeah, we can move on now to the TV show. So. Actually, before we do that, let's talk a little bit more about the Fall of Gondolin, since we were already talking about the First Age. So what are your thoughts on that book?
Oh my God. I can't believe these books are still coming out.
I know, right? Especially after last year. I thought that was going to be the last one that at least Christopher Tolkien helped with.
I have a question for you. I mean, I'm of course excited for it. I'm excited to see what it adds to the Legend of Darien. But like, do you think it's going to add a lot more content, or do you think it's going to like just delve deeper into what we already know?
I think a little bit of both. I hope it's a little bit more of inside the mind of Tuor, and his journey to Gondolin and what happened with Inside. You know, kind of getting into his head. Because even in The Lord of the Rings, something that we don't get in the Silmarillion, but within The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, we kind of see what the main characters are thinking. With how Bilbo wrote within the frame narrative of The Hobbit, we definitely saw his inner monologues. That would be something I'd want to see within the Fall of Gondolin, because we know the story, we know how it falls, how it goes down. Speaking of which, I got to make a video about that sometime.
Yeah.
But it's more just like, I want to see what the character motivations are. If I could get inside of Glorfindel's head as he charged a Balrog off of a cliff, like, hype, yeah, that would be just blessed, you know.
You know what I want? Huh. I want a backstory for the Fire Drake.
Wait, which one? And Celegon or
no, specifically the Fire Drake of Gondolin. I mean, what do we know about this thing? It has a name that is the Fire Drake of Gondolin, and it brought Balrogs.
That's fair. Yeah. get a story about him, a narrative. That'd be very interesting. Yeah. Heck, it would even be great to see inside of Melkor's mind before he had them invade, right? What was he thinking? Like, knowing this is one of the last bastions of the elves, right? After this, I've pretty much wiped them out, except for,
right?
You know, the
right?
Yeah.
Question mark?
I mean, that's what he's thinking, right? And the havens of Sirion are left, but I mean, and there are a few other places, but I mean, Gondolin was one of the last ones before the elves are starting to throw in the hat, you know? But I just want to see, more inner monologues would be great with that book. But no, I'm excited for it. I'm excited to see kind of where it goes and how it'll differ from the Silmarillion.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, no, let's get on to the TV show. So
can't wait.
I think they're aiming for what, 2020? Yeah, 2020, I think.
I don't remember the date.
It's supposed to rival Game of Thrones. It's got supposedly the biggest budget out of any TV show ever.
Ever.
That's crazy.
Can you imagine that?
Yeah. Well, and then we just got the news that it's going to be centered around Aragorn, at least in his younger days before Peter Jackson's movie events.
Yeah, that was the big news of the weekend.
Yeah, definitely. And that's kind of the interesting thing is it going to be in Peter Jackson's universe of Tolkien's universe? I think that's what they're trying to do. I think they're trying to connect it more to the movies than they are to the book, which is why they're trying to also get Peter Jackson to help at least produce or direct the show. So they could get the rights to his universe or his version of Tolkien's universe.
I mean, I don't know a whole lot about the production of this other than the news that broke this weekend and then a couple weeks ago how it was going to be a massive budget. Do you know if Peter Jackson is in consultant?
I don't know for sure. I think I think we're getting close to it, right? Because the last I heard, he was in between doing the show or a DCEU movie for the DC universe. I don't know.
Forgot about that.
Yeah, I hope he chooses the Lord of the Rings show.
I mean, I'm a little biased, but
yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, those movies are, they have their own merits, the DC ones, but
they're fun sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes, but. Honestly, another thing with Peter Jackson, another Lord of the Rings thing with Peter Jackson at the helm would just, I feel like, be a welcome sight as long as he gets the time and the resources that he needs.
It's got to be his movie. It can't be Warner Brothers movie. It can't be Amazon's show. It's got to be Peter Jackson. Here's a bunch of money.
Yeah,
make it happen.
Because I like the Hobbit movies for their own reasons. And for nostalgia's sake, but I mean, if he had been given like the management of the whole team that he had wanted, right, that year of pre-production that he wasn't really given, and then 2 movies instead of 3 like he originally wanted, I just have to wonder, how good could those movies have actually been?
I remember an article came out like a while ago, like a couple of years. Peter Jackson admitted that the whole thing was in shambles from almost the beginning.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he was improvising his way through. If you look at some of those behind the scenes things from the Battle of the Five Armies, he's just sitting there during everyone else's lunch break, and he's just got his head in his hands, and he's just
trying to figure out how he's going to figure it out.
Exactly. So if they do put him with the show, I expect that they need to give him the time, the resources, everything that he needs to make it great, and I'm sure it would be great. As for casting another Aragorn, any thoughts on that?
I actually was going to ask you about that. I was reading a thread about it, and it was on Reddit. This guy was talking about Stephen Amell. I think that's how you pronounce it. He played Arrow, or he played Green Arrow in Arrow, I believe. I do not watch the show. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't watch it either. From what I could tell, I don't know if I could see him as an Aragorn. I don't know if I could see really many actors as an Aragorn.
Dude, Viggo is Aragorn.
He is. You always see those memes of they cast Aragorn to play Aragorn, and it's so true. And I mean, a younger one. I guess the question is how young. Is he going to be Estelle and Rivendell, or is he going to be Strider when he's in his 30s or 40s or even 50s?
Don't even know. He could be like 10.
Yeah, exactly.
There is all we know is that it's going to be Aragorn's going to be a part of the first season, and it's going to be before the events of the War of the Ring. It's like, all right, not a lot to go on. Is his dad going to be alive? Is that going to be a thing?
He'd be 2 years old if his dad was alive. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of weird because if they do go with the Thorongil route where he's helping Theoden's father. Thingel, and he's riding with him and fighting the Corsairs in Gondor. they could easily recast, just have Viggo Mortensen play Aragorn again if Viggo was into it, because he would pretty much look the same. Because again,
how's he doing these days?
I don't know, honestly. I haven't seen him in. I mean, I know he's doing movies, but I've not really watched any of them. I hear they're kind of B movies.
I mean, with today's makeup budgets and talent, I think you can make it happen.
Oh yeah.
So I'm listening. I mean, I don't know who they're going to cast. Any of them. We don't know anything. All we know is that Aragorn's going to be a part of it, and that's enough to get me excited.
Oh yeah, same. Now I've heard a lot of your guys' views on Twitter and Facebook and all that stuff, and I know some of you are more excited than others. That it's going to focus around Aragorn. I mean, I'm okay with it. The first season, I think it'd be cool to see Thorongil in his prime doing his thing in Gondor and Rohan. Traveling through Moria, going into Faerun, right?
Kicking
far
ass.
East. Yeah, exactly. But I don't know. Like, I hope they don't all this, like the 5 seasons that they're in talks of. I hope they don't all focus on characters that we specifically know. I hope they do go to early Rohan, like the events of Helm Hammerhand, all of that, because I think they're just going to pull from the appendices. I don't think they have the rights to the Silmarillion. That might change. Like, who knows? Like a day after.
I mean, if season 1 makes $1 billion, it could probably make it happen. But
yeah, exactly. Well, and with Christopher Tolkien supposedly last year stepping down from the Tolkien estate, I have no idea if they're going to get the rights to Silmarillion. Who knows? Maybe like they're telling us it's Aragorn just to get people like hyped, and then we watch episode 1, season 1, and then we see like Gondolin in the first shot. that would be insane.
I mean, if I were in the position of producing this thing, one of the things like you mentioned, I also really hope that they can branch away from the War of the Ring and explore more of this world that is just immense. There's so many characters with so many stories, but I think they're definitely starting out strong. Like you gotta have season 1, I think, directed around one character, and then maybe in that season you can introduce a different character and make them really likable and stuff like that, and then suddenly everyone's invested in that storyline. So you're like, oh, guess what season 2 is?
That's true. That's true. I mean, it's like the Marvel movie treatment, right? Where it's like
right.
they couldn't just start with Guardians of the Galaxy.
No one would care. No one would care at all.
Exactly. They can't just start with Eorl the Young or Durin the Deathless. They need to start with a name that everyone kind of recognizes. I don't
even think they could start with anyone who's not like in the Fellowship of the Ring or
That's true.
in the Bilbos and the dwarves, like in that caravan. I don't think they could deviate from there.
Oh, yeah.
Honestly, I mean, it's such a Lord of the Rings. I love Lord of the Rings so much, but it's not the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You can't take risks and assume that it's going to profit.
That's true. That's true. I mean, I feel like there's, it's a pretty pop culture thing, Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, especially at this point. But if they do end up drawing on sources from the Silmarillion, that's definitely got more of a cult following.
I would agree.
We're definitely a part of that cult, but
I'd still watch it. I'm just not saying everyone else will.
I'd binge it for days, but yeah, it's like they still have to make money, especially with trying to rival Game of Thrones, which has just this hype around it, even if the writing has started to go downhill in the last few seasons.
I remember when Game of Thrones was like in season 1, and it started as a cult thing because the books were not popular. Like they were known, and they were good, but they were nothing compared to what it's become. And I think that has everything to do with the production team and the actors and the directing of it, especially for those first like 3 or 4 seasons, which were amazing.
Yeah,
like
very true.
if you had one off episode a season, you're like, whatever, I'm hurt. But now season 7.
Yeah, season 7.
Still no Ghost.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, Ghost. Yeah, and I hope they don't. That's something too, right? I feel like the reason that the Game of Thrones show has gone down in quality over the past few seasons is that the writers have just been like, all right, George R. R. Martin, you do your thing with the book, so we're going to do our thing with your source material and just kind of improv our way through. I really hope they don't do that to the show. Because, like, if the TV show is improved and all that kind of stuff, oh my gosh, you'd have such an uproar,
I mean, you're talking about, like, in today's culture, a lot of people don't like it when you deviate from the source material. Can you imagine what the Lord of the Rings, like, fandom would think?
Yeah. Oh god.
You're not touching like someone's teenage obsession. You're touching someone's Bible.
True. Yeah. They often do call it the Bible of the nerds, right? It's true. Oh man, there'd be an uproar. They wouldn't see the light of season 2 if it really derailed, because no one would want to watch it. Tolkien has pretty strict rules when it comes to a lot of things in the universe, which makes it really a fantastic universe.
Thank God for Christopher Tolkien really like putting the leash on the series.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Can you imagine where we would be if he just like was like, oh, I'm here to make money?
Oh yeah. Oh exactly. And they wouldn't be nearly as popular. I doubt we'd be talking about Lord of the Rings right now.
You might not have a YouTube channel.
Exactly. Well, I always say that, right? Like Peter. Thanks to Peter Jackson's movies and the Lord of the Rings Online and all of that stuff, that's kind of the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing. Just because I feel so invested in the universe now after they have gotten me into it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just such a unique place, right? And you get that answer from a lot of people. Where would they go in any fictional world? Most of them would go to Middle Earth just because they want to hang out with hobbits, just because they want it to be a peaceful time. They don't want to get shanked in Westeros or blown up in Star Wars like in a spaceship. So yeah, I mean, Middle Earth is just it's such a sacred place, and I do have my doubts about the TV show with a few things. They do need to deviate a little bit from what we know to parts that we don't know, and they need to do it justice. But I'm looking forward to it.
I'm optimistic about it. I think.
Yeah.
I mean, if you, I personally believe that if you could throw enough money at a problem, it could probably work. And they're certainly throwing money at this thing.
Yeah, they are. Though that's also a little bit of my doubts too, because with the Lord of the Rings, back in the OG times, they didn't. I mean, they had a budget, right? But it was somewhat tight. They had to be very careful with and efficient with how they did certain things. What characters they introduced, they needed it to appeal to a lot of audiences. It's kind of like the same feeling with the original Star Wars movies. Everyone thought the first one was just going to flop, but because it was kind of facing that oppression, it did well.
Yeah, I would agree, but I also would argue that like. The Fellowship of the Ring is an amazing movie, and it brought together the two towers. But by the time that those two movies were out, Peter Jackson just went ham, and he made The Return of the King.
Oh yeah,
and like it won all these Academy Awards, and it was built off of these two like amazing films. Like you can't just run into it and throw a Return of the King at us, because you need the foundation. So I would agree with you there. Like, yeah.
So, well, yeah, overall optimistic about the show. We do have a few reservations about things that I guess we'll just have to see what news we get and kind of what
who's going to play him.
Yeah, who's going to play Aragorn?
Hopefully they'll find some like no one's heard of them British actor, and he turns out to be like Tom Holland, who I love.
Tom Holland as Aragorn. That would be...
Not what I was arguing, but
yeah, I was gonna say I'm not sure about that one. I mean, if he could grow maybe some facial hair, and it's like, yeah, him in Rivendell during like his early days, and like 16 years old, finding out about his lineage, that'd be pretty cool. Yeah.
What if it was like a coming of age, teenage like romance, which like
no. Oh my God, no. Oh man, that
would
like just everyone would they would blow up, right? I think we'd all have to,
why?
We'd all have to go to Amazon's doors, just knock on them and just say, we'd all have our Lord of the Rings weapons in our hands. Yo, what's going on with that movie or the TV show? Well, do you have any more to say about the TV show or any of the topics that we've discussed thus far?
I'm excited for it. I don't think there's a ceiling to what they can accomplish, and I think there's a steady floor that they could fall back on if everything flops. Like it's not going to be the worst movie I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Or the worst TV show I've ever seen by any stretch of the imagination. Because there's some bad TV out there, man.
There is. I pretty much watch only YouTube and movies at this point.
So far.
Yeah. So, well, let's start to wrap it up. If you guys have anything to say, any kind of commentary with what we discussed today, please feel free to leave those in the comments below. Thank you, Royan, for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, dude, anytime. That was a lot of fun, so I can't wait to do more of these in the future. But yeah, let us all know what you think about the podcast in the comments below. What do you guys want to see next time? What do you guys want to see us discuss? Do you like this format? Are there any changes do you think that we should make? But other than that,
should I be cut from the show?
Yeah, no, I need Royan here. But yeah, thank you guys all so much for listening and watching. Thank you all for your support and joining us on Patreon. It really means a lot to me, and I really appreciate it. So I'll talk to you all soon in another video. Thank you all for joining me on this adventure. Until the next one, my friends.